Assalamu alaikum. Today we are going to discuss the specimens of the brain. In the brain, the specimens that we see can be covered or uncovered by the meninges. So this part is covered by the meninges and this is the dura mater, and here we can see that this part is not covered by the dura mater, so we can visualize the sulci and gyri in this one. So this is the dura mater that is covering the brain. If we see the superior view, we see that this dark area is the demarcation for the dural venous sinus, that is the superior sagittal sinus. Alright, moving towards the medial side. So this is the part between the layers of the dura mater, that the superior sagittal venous, and we can see the clot of the blood present in this venous sinus as well. Alright, this is the falx cerebri. This is the front of the brain and this is the posterior part. This is the tentorium cerebelli and this is the falx cerebelli. If we see here, how we identify the posterior part is by the presence of this cerebellum. Alright, so this first of all we see this artery that is running over the corpus callosum and is coming from almost over here. This is the anterior cerebral artery. We memorize that the anterior cerebral artery is going to curve along the curvature of the corpus callosum and is going to supply the medial side of the cerebral hemispheres and 1 inch of the supralateral surface. So this is the rostrum. This small area over here is the rostrum, then the genu body and the splenium of the corpus callosum. We can see the septum pellucidum, and if we remove it, internally is the darker area. This is the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle. This part is the thalamus, and this small part over here is the interthalamic adhesion. This is the hypothalamic sulcus visualized over here, and this is the hypothalamus and the optic chiasm over here. So this is the rostrum, then this small white line is the lamina terminalis leading towards the optic chiasm, and below it over here are going to be the mammillary bodies. So thalamus, hypothalamus separated by the hypothalamic sulcus. This is the rostrum of the corpus callosum, the lamina terminalis leading towards the optic chiasm. This is the mammillary bodies. This is the part of the midbrain with the superior and the inferior colliculus, the cerebellar aqueduct, and this is the part where the tegmentum and the crux cerebri are present. This is the pons, and downwards this is the medulla oblongata. This is the cavity of the fourth ventricle, the floor of the fourth ventricle, and then the roof formed by the superior and inferior velum. These are the arbor vitae of the cerebellum. All of these structures are shown over here. This part slightly bluish. This is the part of the choroid plexus of the fourth ventricle, and over here it is removed, but small structure over here. This is a part of the choroid plexus of the third ventricle. Now if we look at this other model specimen, which is showing the medial and the lateral surfaces of the cerebral hemisphere without the dura mater, what we can see is that this long sulcus, this is the central sulcus. We said that the central sulcus was separated. Here it's not looking like it's separated, but it is separated by gyrus from the lateral sulcus. So this part, this is the central sulcus. In front of the central sulcus, this one is the pre-central sulcus. So this central sulcus is the demarcation for the frontal and the parietal lobes. So in the frontal lobe, the first parallel sulcus is the pre-central sulcus, and these two sulci slightly longer than the others, this one and this one over here. these two sulci, the one here and here, these are the ones that are the superior and the inferior frontal sulci, which separate the frontal lobe into the front of the frontal lobe into superior, middle and inferior frontal gyri. If we look at the parietal lobe, we can see that this was the central sulcus, this is the post central sulcus, and the parietal lobe has one other sulcus, and this one over here is the intraparietal sulcus, which divides the parietal lobe into a superior and an inferior part. Over here, this is the lateral sulcus, and we said that the lateral sulcus has three limbs: the anterior horizontal limb, then there is an anterior ascending limb, and the posterior limb or the posterior ramus. This temporal lobe, this is the temporal lobe. So this temporal lobe is divided by two sulci into three gyri, which are not clearly shown, so I'm not going to discuss it over here. This is the frontal pole, this is the temporal pole, and this is the occipital pole. In this side view, the lateral view, we can see this is the cerebellum. The cerebellar peduncles are shown over here, which are connecting it to the pons, and we can also see the medulla with olives and the in the front the pyramid. This is going to then continue towards the spinal cord. On the medial side, what we can see is that this is the front, this is the back side, anterior part, the posterior part. How we define the anterior and posterior part? Because of the presence of the cerebellum. So this cerebellum is present posteriorly. What other structures can be identified? This is the corpus callosum, the main structure that is seen in every specimen is the corpus callosum. So the chinu, the body and the splenium of the corpus callosum. Above it is the callosal sulcus, then the cingulate gyrus and the cingulate sulcus. These all are the medial frontal gyri. This part is the part which is extending from the central sulcus. So this is the part of the paracentral lobule. This is the parieto-occipital sulcus, which we said was present 2.5 centimeters from the occipital pole and goes behind the splenium. So this is the paracentral lobule. This is the this is the parieto-occipital sulcus, and this is the calcarine sulcus. Between the parieto-occipital and the calcarine sulcus, this part is called the cuneus. Above the parieto-occipital sulcus, this part is called the precuneus. This is the occipital pole, and above the occipital pole over here is the lingual gyrus. This is the internal carotid artery, but the branch is missing over here. Alright, below the corpus callosum we can see this layer of the cell. This is the septum pellucidum. If we separate the layers of the septum pellucidum, inside over here, inside the anterior horn of the lateral ventricle is present. This is the thalamus. Extending down from the thalamus is the hypothalamus. The optic chiasm is, this is the optic chiasm. So all of this area is the continuation of the hypothalamus, which is not clear in this specimen. Going backwards, this is the downwards, this is the midbrain with the cerebral aqueduct, and the superior and this is the inferior colliculus, which is shown over here. This is the pons, this is medulla, this is the cavity of the fourth ventricle. This is the cerebellum with the blood supply coming off over here. This is the cerebellum and the arbor vitae of the cerebellum.